Well, good morning and welcome to Coffee with Ken. I'm Ken Biberaj, a managing director at Savills, a leading tenant advisory commercial real estate firm. We are in week 58 of social distancing as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. In the news today, President Biden addressed Congress last night and called for an expansion of government services. New York City tourism industry lost billions in 2020, according to a new report from the state controller. The topic is tourism post-COVID. And we're joined by Roger Dow, President and CEO of the U.S. Travel Association, and Elliott Ferguson, President and CEO of Destination DC. Good to see you, gentlemen.
Oh, good to see you, Ken.
Morning, Ken.
Well, great seeing you. I think as a kind of starting point, it's always great to kind of hear how the last 58 weeks have been for you personally, family, et cetera, and your organization. And then we'll get into kind of the industry itself. But Roger, what's the last year? You know, I'm sure you've never been someone who travels a lot or goes to conventions or does anything, right? So this is totally normal for you, right?
Ken, a normal week for me is used to be 2-3 trips during the week, at least three, 4 segments. Last time I was in DC officially was March 17th, a year ago. We were meeting with the president, vice president, secretary of commerce on saying this thing looks like it's going to be pretty bad. We got to really look at protecting the workers. And I live in Petersburg, Florida, and DC, and I've only been in DC 5 times in the past year, which is ridiculous because I'm there every single week in a normal year.
Wow, incredible. And Elliott, how are you holding up?
You know, it's similar to Roger. It's been, I call it, if I had to talk to psychiatrists, I'd say we all went in phases. One, we were in denial, then we were in shock, and then we didn't know what the heck to do, and now we're working towards recovery to a certain extent. And I mean, it's not just the industry, but of course, for all of us, it's our team. It's all the things that are near and dear to us. So it's been stressful. I tell anyone, if they want to go into management, the great part about it is doing your job. The hard part about it is managing people and their expectations. And I think this year has been even more along those lines. Roger and I both run organizations that are membership based, and I've got 1,000 members, and I'm one of Roger's members. And everyone has demands, and they're different than what we're normally used to. So it's been a very challenging, but also an opportunity to reflect and grow as organizations as we look at what's happened.
So let's get a lay of the land of the last year and the actual impact on the industry itself, right? Roger, like take us nationally, like how many jobs were lost, what kind of revenue was lost? Like I've always been a big supporter and proponent of tourism, and I feel like it doesn't get enough attention about the actual impact it makes to the economy locally, statewide, nationally, internationally. So what's the kind of lay of the land of the numbers over the last year?
Sure, Ken. The travel industry has been hurt more than any other industry by far. Last year, we lost about $500 billion. Down 45%. But as you mentioned, the toll on the people, we're a very labor intensive business. So as 17 million people get their job through travel and tourism, and we've been down to 11 million, which is down 35%. Of all the unemployed in the United States, 65% come from the travel industry, yet only 1 in 10 employees are in the travel industry. So this is the industry that's been hit the hardest. And international has been down almost 80%. Business travel and group meetings are the biggest challenge right now. Leisure in many pockets is doing well, but we really make the money and we live on business travel, meetings, and international.
Wow. And for the District of Columbia, Elliott, right? We've spent some time getting food in DC, going out, talking about conventions, et cetera. And everything was on the up and up. I mean, DC is a place. I mean, I was out of the area for 15 years living in New York, and I come back and there's Michelin star restaurants everywhere. You're tripping over them. I mean, give us the lay of the land. Like, what's it been like for you as an organization over the last 10 years, the moment we're in, and then how devastating has COVID been to DC in particular in your organization?
Sure. I'll go back to even beyond that. I moved to DC December 2001, right after 9/11, and we were in a recovery phase. So, and since then, as cities and states and countries think about things in which they've had to deal with, we've had 9/11, we had sniper, we had anthrax, we had 7 government shutdowns, the insurrection on January the 6th. So we are, arguably accustomed to things that are disruptors, but nothing like this pandemic. We're talking a city that normally realizes nearly $9 billion in economic impact in tourism, and that's off by about $7 billion. 90,000 people are employed in this industry on a normal basis as we looked at 2019, and that's down considerably. So, it took us 10 years to rebound after 9/11. And, we just cannot afford that type of timeline now. But I think that the reality is, like 9/11, that was the first time something of that magnitude had happened in the US. This is the first time in our lifetimes, and we're still trying to feel our way out of it. But we do feel like there's light at the end of the tunnel, but not without a lot of realizations in terms of what it's done to this industry and the industry in Washington.
So picking back on that, taking it to the next level, Roger, right? We were chatting before we went live. Tourism in general, right, has had setbacks, whether it's 9/11, the recession. How is this different on a national level? And what are you seeing in terms of like the path to recovery on?
Put it in perspective, this is probably 10 times worse than September 11th. We're basically projecting $1 trillion loss to the economy due to travel and tourism. So we got a much longer way to go. And the thing about September 11th is it was very specific. You knew where it was, you knew the event, you knew what took place, and you could put your finger on it. This thing is everywhere, and not only everywhere in the US, but everywhere around the world. And that's been the bigger challenge. There's a lot of people who predict that we're not coming back till 2025. I don't quite believe that. I really believe it's a more resilient industry, and it's so much pent up demand. I think once people start seeing things happening, my big control is corporate travel directors and allowing their people to travel, and corporate CFOs saying, boy, look at all the money we saved. Do we need people to travel anymore? And that's a big concern we've got to work on.
That's interesting. How do you look at the kind of recovery in the near term, Elliott, right? Like, how are vaccines being distributed in DC? How is, any uptick? What kind of silver lining are you seeing right now in the near term as we enter the summer, right? Mayor de Blasio in New York just announced that, July 1st, they're going to open everything up in New York. Positive indicators. I feel like, every day that passes, we're kind of seeing glimpses of, the economy and momentum heading in the right direction. How are you seeing that locally?
Yeah, from most of the cities, from Washington up the coast, because we meet and talk on a regular basis with my peers in Boston, New York, Philly, and Baltimore, and commiserate to a large extent as to how shut down we are. And I think that, one of the things we've been talking to our mayor about is doing something similar, forecasting beyond 30 days what opening will look like. I think the positive for us is that May 1st is pivotal for us as the mayor's opening up some things. We've just got the announcement this week that the Smithsonian's are reopening. They're staggering their reopenings, which is all good news. And to the point in regards to the vaccine, you got 700,000 people that live in Washington, and a large percentage of that population is clearly focusing on getting vaccinated. And I think I'm currently visiting my parents in Savannah, and when you're in Washington, D.C., walking down the street, going into any venue, it's mandatory that you wear a mask, and it's enforced. And I think that's going to work to our advantage as we're looking at recovery, because, even though we know that there are a lot of states that have been a lot more flexible than Washington, D.C., I think the perception, which is extremely important as we're looking at recovery, is that Washington is taking this seriously, and we're requiring that of those that are coming to the city, and as well as keeping those that are in the city safe.
So, Roger, post 9/11, lasting impact on security at airports. I've heard you talk a lot about that and kind of the pressures and the kind of systems that we put in place, post 9/11. What can we expect to be a lasting impact on travel post COVID? I mean, how do you think about that? What are you worried about? What are you thinking?
Well, I think, Ken, as you look at September 11th, that was, if you look back 20 years ago, and 20 years ago, we're still going through metal detectors, taking out our laptops, liquids, taking off shoes. And that was 20 years ago. What we saw is a great amount of technology came out of September 11th. And I think what's going to happen here is health and security and health and safety are going to become the new hospitality. Just as hotels are rated on their quality of service and their building product, et cetera, I think you're also going to see safety and security ratings. Travel directors and people are going to be looking for signs and signals that they're doing the right thing. I think the plus is this came along at a time when technology, we're just pushing towards biometrics, pushing towards touchless, using your phone. And I think this is going to be sped up. And I think your mobile device is going to become much more of a factor of checking into a hotel, going into a meeting, showing that you've had a vaccine or a PCR test or whatever. So I think that health and safety is here to stay. And I think many of the things are good and are positive. We've always been a clean industry. Now we're a squeaky clean industry.
Yeah, I mean, just piggyback on this, right? So the EU just opened up travel starting this summer for Americans that have been vaccinated. How do you see vaccine mandates being enforced or putting into place? I mean, is that going to be something on a global basis? I mean, there's a lot of talk and, kind of
It's a big discussion around the world of whether to have a mandatory vaccine. In the US, we're opposed to it. We think it should be one of many criteria to come in, but I think someone should be able to come into our country if they've had a vaccine, if they can show that they've got a PCR test in the past 72 hours, whatever. There should be multiple ways of getting in, just like there's multiple ways of going through security. It's just not a driver's license. It can be a passport, it can be a Nexus card, et cetera. So we're against mandating vaccine for several reasons. One, it's inequitable to some people that can't get vaccines. Two, there's always going to be 30%, no matter what, for whatever reason, of folks that choose not to get a vaccine, and be silly to, if they can meet another criteria, to hold those people out. I think you're going to see Europe be much more strict on saying vaccine or no entry. We're pushing to reopen the UK corridor first, because we think once we can get UK, New York open, then the rest will quickly follow.
Sure. So one of the kind of themes through COVID has been the kind of inequitable impact on it, especially on communities of color, looking around the country. Elliott, I think you just became board chair of Tourism Diversity Matters. Can you talk a little bit about some of the efforts you're pursuing there, or just on a broader basis? I mean, we talked a little bit about the workforce and the talent and the people who are in the industry. How is this maybe disproportionately impacted more vulnerable communities, and how do we kind of recover in a more equitable way?
Yeah, I think the key thing for us with Tourism Diversity Matters is for us to continue to focus on all things that, quite frankly, we talked about when I was chair of U.S. Travel Association, and the industry is focused on, as we looked at, Black Lives Matter, the senseless murder of George Floyd, and others, and coming to grips with some of the inequities and within the industry as it pertains to people that are marginalized for a variety of reasons. So I think as we look at, your question was kind of twofold. One, it's important that, Tourism Diversity Matters is focusing on clear diversity within the industry and opportunities for LGBTQ, those with handicaps, Native Americans, Latinx. I'm sorry, I'm sure I said that wrong. And all communities that are involved in hospitality, but are not necessarily seeing opportunities to be upwardly mobile to a large degree. So, and that's extremely near and dear to my heart. I know it's something that Roger and others, we've been talking about it quite frankly, quite often. I'll be back in Georgia in a couple of weeks to continue that conversation, simply because it's important. As we look at vaccinations and the inequities within the industry, within the communities, I think education plays a huge role in it. I think that, even though we're not necessarily for mandatory vaccine cards, as Roger just referenced, I think that as we're looking at travel in the future, international and otherwise, there are going to be those that are going to require or say that basically you cannot travel unless you're vaccinated. So I think there's an opportunity to make sure that point is made to locals, to various communities, especially minorities, as they're looking at moving forward. What happens if you want to go on a cruise on the river in Savannah, which is where I am now, and they're not allowing you on because you haven't been vaccinated? I'm hoping that won't be the case, but at the same time, I'm hoping that people will look at it and recognize the importance of getting vaccinated for obvious reasons.
Yeah, we're pushing very much for that. I think Elliott went quickly to say he was our national chair, and I'm a big believer that leaders come along at the right time. And had Elliott not been our national chair, we couldn't have had the candid dialogue that we had. And Elliott really led the industry in doing that. We had webinars of up to 2,000 people. We never got those kind of numbers to talk about this issue, but now it's ongoing with him chairing up the whole diversity and equity committee for the industry.
That's fantastic. I mean, when we look about this, I mean, you talked, Roger, about post 9/11, right? This didn't happen in one place. This is global, right? So you see pictures kind of out of New Zealand, people are out there, festivals are going on, and then you see these dire, devastating pictures out of India. How are you thinking about just the global response and recovery? And what I'm kind of getting at is, business cares a lot about certainty, right? Businesses, if you're reopening a restaurant or hotel, you want to kind of keep, slowly increasing. You don't want any setbacks. You don't want to have any kind of anything that's going to disrupt you as part of a recovery. What are you worried about as we enter into the summer, as this pandemic still kind of plagues the world?
I'm worried about the ability to service the business that's coming. Summer looks like it's going to be strong. Southwest just brought back 2,700 flight attendants.
Wow.
Airlines is predicting being in the black this summer. And what I'm hearing from hoteliers, from the Disneys of the world, of getting employees is a big problem. We've got general managers cleaning rooms because we can't get the workers back. And that is going to be one of the biggest problems. So it's a good news thing, the business is coming back, but we've got to figure out how to get these people back into the workplace again versus just not working.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Elliott, how reliant are you locally on domestic travel versus international, and how are you kind of approaching that? I mean, I think last time we got together, I think you were traveling, internationally to kind of boost DC and promote it. I mean, that's a big part of, the role of someone like you and, Fred Dixon and others around the country to obviously make the United States and certain, jurisdictions attractive for visits and stuff. So how's your job changed now?
Yeah, about that, right? It's Roger and I will, and others. I talked to Chris Thompson, who runs Brand USA on a regular basis, about how much we, how hard it was to be on a plane for 12 hours and be in a city for a day and then come back, but how much we miss it now. To the point you're making, the domestic visitor is what we're going to be focusing on. We've got about 50 million people that live within 4 hours of Washington, D.C. It's an extremely important market to us. It's always been our largest market. But at the end of the day, we're an economic development organization. Mm-hmm. And so as much as I love the 8th graders to come to Washington, but they're going to all the free things and eating at Chipotle and probably staying in the suburbs. Their economic impact today is not great, but I joke that in 20 years, they'll come back and spend more. So the international market is extremely important to us as we look at this through an economic lens. I mean, the spend is there, the amount of time here is in the US is larger. And not only that, but the opportunity to visit more than one destination, starting in Boston, hitting all the key cities, and maybe concluding in Washington. So we are out of necessity focusing on the domestic market, but at the same time, we're still remaining relatively active in the international market with the offices that we have in different countries.
Interesting. Roger, in your position, how are you coordinating and teaming up with other associations, organizations, whether they be the National Restaurant or hotel organizations? How much of a kind of code red has this been to kind of aggregate and organize the advocacy around the response? Like, how I'm sure you've dealt with and cooperated with colleagues at other associations, organizations in the past, obviously, but like how is everyone coming together now? And is there a unified roadmap on kind of moving forward in terms of what you're looking for from policymakers at the state, local, and national level?
No question about it. It's the old, a tragedy creates a lot of great friends and partners. We've always worked very closely with Hotel and Lodging Association, Chamber of Commerce, Restaurant Association, Destinations International, but this has brought us together. We had to come together back in May as an industry and set guidelines for the whole industry. And that meant airlines, destinations, attractions, hotels. And we set a set of protocols the whole industry adopted. We're now working on recovery, and the whole industry came together and with a campaign called Let's Go There. 75 different organizations funded and participated, chief marketing officers, on a campaign to say, hey, when you're ready, start thinking about planning, because we found the planning process is just as important as travel. And now to get recovery, it was an industry-wide effort to get the relief that was needed. It was delayed for many times. One of the tragic mistakes made in the first CARES package is 501c6s or nonprofits were cut out. So folks like Elliott, who depend on hotel tax and all that, they were ground down to very low revenue coming in. So we're finally at the last minute to get that corrected. But now we're working with the government to say, hey, look, you want to bring the economy back, let's work on stimulus. Let's work on tax credits for people who travel, for going to meetings and all that. So that's the next phase, is now start stimulating travel and the economy. Because I always say, as goes travel, goes U.S. economy. It used to be as goes GM, goes U.S. economy. But right now, nothing happens until someone takes a trip, where their kids go to school, where they relocate, where they take a job, where they build a factory. All starts with a trip. So we're the fulcrum to everything else that happens.
So Elliott, give us a little lay of the land about you as an organization. I mean, I think that's a good point, Roger, right? If you're not getting the revenue from hotels, how are you funded? How are you dealing as Destination DC? And what kind of support do you need, whether it's local or federal?
Yeah, 2020 was tough on us. I mean, as Roger referenced, we were not eligible for PPP until really December of last year. And with that, we were robbing Peter to pay Paul, or not paying anyone, and trying to keep our teams intact. I think the realization for all of us is that when you're a DMO, your biggest asset is your team. And if you lose your team, when things turn around and you have to react immediately, you won't have the people in place. And as you look at replacing those people, it takes 3 to 6 months to get them to ramp up. So it was tough, and it remains tough. I mean, as we look at our funding, 80% of my budget is tied to hotel tax. We get less than 1% of the hotel tax, but it's 80% of my budget. The other 20% is membership. So for the first 6 months, membership was also suspended for all members. So we had no revenue coming in. It was all trickling in. And as we look towards the future, and I credit Roger and his team at U.S. Travel Association, Tory Barnes, for being advocates for our industry, because now we are eligible for PPP, which gives me a lifeline to keep my team intact, pay some bills, and then look towards recovery. But the reality with that is that I won't have any money for marketing. And and that's something in which we're having to focus on with Events DC, which is quasi-government and owns all the venues, including the convention center, and with the city, because you're going to have, and our members, they're going to all have great expectations of me, but we don't have the resources financially to realize some of those expectations, whereas other cities will be more positioned a lot better. You saw New York just received from Mayor Blasio $30 million that Fred got. I'm very pleased with that, and I'm saying to our mayor, if a city like New York, because people here think that you don't have to promote DC. Everybody wants to come. It's not who wants to come; it's who you want to come. And if New York is committing those types of dollars, then why shouldn't DC, the 8th most visited city by the global community, also be more active and getting and rebounding and getting back on track?
And so talking about the return on investment is so huge. He spends a small amount of money and brings in a whole lot of money. And when you look at it, the loss just to state, local, and federal taxes has been $70 billion. So that's policemen, teachers, firemen that have to find another way of being paid or raise taxes. And this is one of the best ways. I always say, have visitors come in, leave their money home, and you don't have to educate their kids, fill their potholes or whatever. It's really helpful to local economies.
So what are you focused on today, Roger, with the new administration in office, right? So there's been a lot with the recovery package, president's announcements yesterday, infrastructure. Where are you focusing your efforts and energy? And what are you looking for from the current administration to step up and kind of meet the needs of the industry?
In the short term, we're looking for the administration to really help us in recovery. And we've got a bill going through called the Hospitality and Commerce Jobs Act. And it basically creates tax incentives for people to travel. And that may sound counterintuitive, but the bottom line is when someone travels, they may get a $5 tax incentive, but they spend $20. And so it puts more people to work, and it's one of the quickest ways to prime the pump. Opening up international is the highest priority. We met with a fellow named Jeff Zients, who is the White House, for lack of a better word, COVID czar, and everything goes through Jeff. And the bottom line is we're pushing very hard to open the UK, US corridors, I said earlier, because once we get that, the rest will follow. Then the next thing is the whole infrastructure to make sure the right things are spent on modernizing our airports, making sure our roads. Someone in Myrtle Beach recently said, I don't compete with Virginia Beach. He said, I compete with the highway system. It's so clogged up. People are saying, I don't want to drive that far. So this whole infrastructure package is extremely important. So it's a matter of getting the relief, opening up international corridors, and our infrastructure. They're our top priorities. The future of mobility. Look at electrification. We're not prepared in any way for all the electric cars that are coming on. Where are you going to charge them? How are you going to charge them? Things like that people aren't even thinking about, that we've got to get in front of, because infrastructure doesn't happen slowly. It takes a long time.
Well, it's funny because there's a lot of commentary in Washington today about what is infrastructure, and that broadband is infrastructure, et cetera. I just kind of feel like tourism is infrastructure, right? I mean,
it is infrastructure, and I mean, if you look at the things from an infrastructure standpoint, it's almost like when you look at the National Stadium, it was like grass seed on steroids of all the office buildings, restaurants, apartments that popped up all around it, an area that was pretty dead. And so many things when travel and tourism comes in, it brings in a whole regentrification of a city, new restaurants, new living. And so it's as critical as anything I can think of to rebuilding our cities.
One of the things that I've always kind of felt that there's been a disconnect with policymakers on as it relates to travel is really not understanding that you can't take tourism travel for granted. You actually have to work at it. It takes effort, it takes investment. You have to kind of be constantly pushing at it. And I kind of felt, some big cities, maybe, even New York at times when 60 million people, like they'll always come, it's New York. And now obviously something like this happens, right? And I think it just amplifies the need that you have to constantly be working at it. Elliott, tell us about that. I mean, like, how is your pitch and your kind of focus evolved and how true is that, right? I mean, is this something that requires clearly a lot of attention and work on a daily basis to kind of, protect this industry and the sector and the ROI it generates?
I will say that in the last 10 years, it's gotten a lot easier. There's nothing positive about what's happened with this pandemic, especially when you look at the number of lives lost. But, as a leader of an organization such as mine, I have to look at what have we learned and how have we grown and what has our city learned? I think now more than ever, they recognize the importance of tourism dollars and hospitality jobs. I think that for a long time and probably for a long time to come, there have been people that poked holes in the types of jobs that have been created because of hospitality when a restaurant opens. And I look at it through the lens of, yeah, but if you have a percentage of your community that don't have the necessary skills, what hospitality is one of the best opportunities that affords the opportunity to do on-the-job training, and then all of a sudden you have people that you've been paying unemployment to and other services that are now employed. I think now more than ever, our stakeholders understand the importance of this industry. There's nothing like when no one shows up to understand and respect and appreciate the nuisance of visitors and all the things in which people talk about, the traffic, people in the streets. And I think that's been a positive for us in terms of them saying, okay, we get it. In DC, the federal government is the largest employer. The hospitality industry is probably one of the most nimble and one of the fastest growing at various levels. And I think now more than ever, I don't have to go into City Hall in Washington, DC and tell them who I am and what I do. They now get it.
Interesting. I think one of the biggest takeaways I'm taking from this, Roger, is the realization that corporations really need to be partners in this to boost corporate travel and how important that is. Can you talk a little bit more about that? Like, what are your efforts now? I mean, what was engagement with, the JP Morgans of the world and Salesforces of the world always a top priority, or was corporate travel already happening that didn't require so much attention and advocacy and kind of connectivity between you and them?
It was almost happening on its own, and was not a high priority for us because our whole thing was to make travel frictionless and get through airports, et cetera. But now, in the area of your expertise is office buildings. You get someone that calls up their client and says, "I'd like to come see you," and the client says, "We'd like to see you, but no one's allowed in our office except people who work here." And so that's one of the big things we've got to overcome to get offices to begin opening up to visitors and all that. And until that happens, it's going to be very difficult for people to make sales calls. In fact, some of the hotel chains are actually opening up day offices and say, okay, you can rent a room for 4 or 5 hours to meet. In Bentonville, Arkansas, which is a salesperson's mecca, every day people go there. I'm hearing stories of people meeting at the Walmart now because their office is closed, and they're saying, okay, I'll meet you at the Starbucks at the Walmart, and that's becoming the new office building for me. So that's one of the big things we've got to get for America opening up to visitors also.
Fascinating. Yeah. Elliott, we talked a little bit at the beginning with Roger mentioned just innovations in technology. how do you both see technology adding and supporting and aiding in the recovery, right? Like 10 years ago, I mean, Airbnb wasn't what it is today, right? As you think about these different pockets of the industry and technology, making it easier and more seamless to travel, how is technology going to play a role in tourism's recovery?
Yeah, it's going to be significant. I think that, just from the biometrics that Roger referenced in terms of those that are vaccinated versus those that are not, we've been talking a long time about, why do at least why do I have to have a hard copy of my passport or my visa when I'm traveling in different countries, whereas we've got all this technology that's out there. I think the pandemic has forced associations to think differently. As we look at the association business, I was on a call with about 30 meeting planners earlier this week, similar to what we're doing now, but a larger audience. And now it's all about hybrid meetings. And not only that, because we know that people want to get to meet in person, that's the case. But now, instead of being so closed-minded and saying, no, we absolutely cannot have a Zoom link to a meeting that's ongoing, the mindset is changing. And now it's out of necessity, but long-term, it's like, well, what have we learned from this and how can we grow from this? My personal story is that, I go to a large church in Washington, D.C. We have 20,000 plus members, which is large. Our pastor said, if you don't live in the DMV, you can't be a member. Well, guess what he's saying now? It's global. And simply because he's grown by this significant amount of people that are interested in what his message. And he's like, I would have never thought that I would change my mind. But this pandemic has required folks to look at things differently, to embrace technology through a different lens and utilize it in a way that benefits them.
Well, it's mentioned is really interesting. We've gone to this hybrid meeting, and the reason, Ken, this call is working because you, Elliott, and I know each other. We know who we've interacted in the past. If we were complete strangers, this would be a more difficult call. And the reason that hybrid has worked and Zooms and all that is because we've all known each other. But that will disappear after a while. The one good thing is we've learned to expand our audience. I mean, Elliott and I have been on conference with 5,000 and 10,000 people. Wouldn't have happened before. And so I think we have an opportunity to expand the meeting audience and then get people to say, I don't want to miss it next year. I want to be there face to face. So I think there's a silver lining in there, and we're gone are the days of either virtual or in person. It's going to be the two together for quite a while, and I think it's going to expand the audience.
In that vein, lots of positives, right? Bigger audience, et cetera, but nothing really, in my opinion, and I'm sure you agree, beats in person. And I think one of the things that has always struck me as one of the most important things about travel and tourism is the softer social connectivity, right? The ability to get to know each other, other Americans, their way of life, seeing the country, seeing where they are. And this kind of sense that it brings us closer together. And I think 2020 has just been such a divisive year in terms of pulling us apart. And I feel like the pandemic amplified that, and in part because we weren't able to travel and see each other and be in person and so on. What role does a strong travel recovery play in potentially bringing America closer together and the global community?
I think.
I think. Go ahead.
Go ahead,
sorry,
Elliott. No, Elliott.
Well, I think that just watching and listening to the president's address last night, it really touched on some key things. There was a comment about that certain things don't exist in America, like we're not a racist country or whatever, however it was put. But I think the key thing that I appreciate about the opportunity to travel domestically and internationally is that we have an opportunity to celebrate the ways in which we're all alike and appreciate more the ways in which we're different. And I think that is one of the key components of travel. Me going to the continent of Africa and understanding the dynamics of the various countries there and how people, there's things that are there are similarities. As I know, my genetics tell me that my family is from the west coast of Africa. But then going to China, whereas the dynamic is totally different, and for them to, in some cases, not have experienced, especially if you go out of the major cities, someone that is Black or tall, and all of a sudden everyone wants to take my picture, but also, they are appreciating the opportunity to interface with me and learn more about me as an American, but also as a Black American. And I think that is the unique opportunity that affords us when we travel. We truly appreciate the uniquenesses, and we understand a lot more about how unique we are, how similar we all are, comparatively speaking, to what we think or what we might perceive on a regular basis.
I think Mark Twain, 120 years ago, said a truism that is more true than ever before. And he said, travel is fatal to prejudice, bigotry, and narrow-mindedness. And when Elliot and I, when we travel around the world and we'll go to a global trade show, it's amazing to me to watch in the Middle East aisle where the people from Israel, Palestine, all the various countries get together and say, hey, where are you going for dinner tonight? And just like we interact, and then they go back home and they're fighting with each other. It's the one that really brings people together and creates understanding that nothing else that I can think of can do that.
So I think tourism is one of these things where everybody can play a role, right? From the biggest companies opening offices slowly and getting people out there and authorizing travel to universities and people getting out there. What's your recommendation and kind of request to regular Americans, just at home? I mean, is it to get out there, go somewhere different? What's your advice to them? Is it to call a member of Congress and push for support for the industry? Is it to hire more people? What is it? What do you need Americans to do?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, all the above.
Yeah, I truly think traveling, we have a great opportunity here for Americans to see Americans. People are going to be reticent to travel outside the United States for the next year. Business people will do it, but gone are the days of let's go on the safari. That's going to have to wait till 2022, 2023, and it will come back, and people will want to do that. But right now, we have a great opportunity in the United States to really build upon local tourism, local leisure travel in the U.S., get that done, and have the voice of the congressman. I was just on the phone today with a senator from Iowa talking about travel and tourism, and the constituent in Iowa, she'll listen to them. She's a friend of mine, but the bottom line, she listens to her constituents. So it's our constituents around the country that can have a lot of leverage with our elected officials to say, hey, we got to get this thing moving again.
Yeah. And last question, just, how do we increase broader access to tourism and travel, right? I mean, I think one of the things, to your point earlier, there's been pent up demand, right? So how are you proactively trying to encourage even broader demographics, maybe not even business travelers, but just, regular Americans to come to Washington, to go to Bentonville, to go to Iowa? Is there more of a focus on that? I mean, I think the national parks have had, record turnout for people kind of visiting parks this year because they couldn't go international. I mean, how much of an effort is going to be doubling down this summer on just domestic travel and getting people to just go see other parts of the country?
Yeah, from our perspective, we're looking at, I appreciate the fact that people come to Washington for monuments, memorials, and museums. That's what we're known for. And the fact that so many of them are free, that's a value added for so many people who's economically have been challenged over the last 12 months. But also at the same time, we are challenging individuals to look at DC through a different lens, be it the food scene that you talked about earlier, the sports scene. Our next week is Travel and Tourism Week, so our travel rally is at the new Audi Field, which is a new soccer field in Washington, which is known as which is international football, and to recognize the architecture, the international feel of Washington, 185 embassies. It's a very international community with only 700,000 people. So come for the reasons that you appreciate, but also recognize that from the civil rights experience to the Black Lives Matter Plaza to the First Lady's dresses in the Natural History Museum to a tour of the Italian Renaissance and architecture in Washington. It's such a diverse destination, and there's so many opportunities for folks to come back and enjoy that and look at us beyond the National Mall experience.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's fantastic.
Yeah, and I think what's happened is it's opened up a whole new set of destinations. As you said, Ken, national parks have had a phenomenal summer and going to have another record-breaking summer. South Dakota tourism of places, Wyoming, places like that are doing extremely well. And I think it's such a big country. We have a great opportunity for Americans, those who've never been to DC before, to come to DC for all the things. They're going to be surprised because everyone thinks of museums, the monuments, and government. And when you get there and you see the vibrancy of the Chinatowns, the growth of sports, the growth of restaurants, it's a whole new opportunity that people never even thought of since the school trip they took 20 years ago.
There you go. Elliott's playing the long game. Gentlemen, it's so wonderful seeing you both. Amazing to have this conversation, really highlight some of the important things you're working on a daily basis to boost travel and tourism and the impact it has every single day on Americans, on balance sheets, on revenue for municipalities, and just bringing us closer together. So thank you. Great seeing you. Appreciate everyone tuning in today. Our next Coffee with Ken next week is going to be with Matthew Shea, CEO of the National Retail Federation. In the meantime, please practice social distancing, wash your hands, wear a mask, and get a vaccine. Take care, gentlemen.
Thanks, Ken. Bye-bye.
Care. See you.